Welcome back. It's our breaking news story at this hour. Of course, the South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee, the MPC, deciding to keep interest rates unchanged at 6.75% for the repo rate, that is. Let's discuss this and a whole lot of other permutations with regards to fiscal and perhaps even monetary policy as we're supposed to. And in studio, I'm joined by Maura Ferguson, an economist at PwC, and Lumkile Mondi, who is a professor then at the Wits School of Business and Economics. Thank you so much for the time, Maura. Unsurprised decision there. Surely a unanimous one as well, 6.75%. Any surprises with regards to the statement at all?
So it was not a surprise that the Reserve Bank decided to keep rates unchanged, but perhaps what was a surprise is the extent to which the outlook to inflation has improved. So that's definitely good news for consumers. And furthermore, the pace of monetary policy tightening is not as perhaps aggressive as the prediction was still in November.
If we take that into account then, Lumkile, it's very difficult for one to ask and to get a correct answer, shall we say, for an improved outlook with regards to inflation, whether it be oil, whether it be food inflation as well, all those prices, and yet you keep rates unchanged. One would have thought that basic economics tells you that you should be decreasing interest rates at this level.
Well, they understand very well, that's a committee, the Monetary Policy Committee, understand very, very well that the environment domestically is very, very tricky. Remember that we are on credit watch continuously because we have not come up yet with a plan for Eskom. So in the short to medium term, the next at least 9 months, there are so many uncertainties that relate to, firstly, the budget that's coming up next month, which will tell us how we're going to fund institutions, and then thereafter the elections, which will then will bring some confidence and therefore certainty for the next 5 years. So those equations can really upset the apple pie, and I think that's why there's been no mention at all about to be cut now, and really they made an error in the last meeting. I think they were too preemptive.
Should they then not be reversing that error, so to speak, considering that things look a little bit better?
Institutionally, you look stupid. So remember,
lose credibility.
You lose credibility. Yeah. So what you do basically, you know what, guys made a mistake, but let's keep quiet. Let's talk about it. And I think that's the way. That's how the governance are very conservative. They're conservative people, so they won't admit mistake, and at the same time they won't allow us to then expose them that, look, why did they cut last meeting when they're increasing this meeting, or vice versa. So they're very smart about it.
Maura, do you think that the sentiment then, if you take that, right, do they completely worry then that they've left things too far high in this context? Yes, they were worried about certain factors, but now things are improving ever so slightly, and they have no way of retracing their steps, so to speak, and they'll just hope for the best, while some might think this is choking growth.
So I would not say that they've left it too high. I would say that it makes sense given that their focus is increasingly on the midpoint of the target range. And even with the increase in the repo rate at the end of last year, there's still an expectation that inflation will maybe test the upper boundary, although it will not move as far as previously predicted.
And the midpoint 4.5% is obviously a key factor for them. If you look at the outer years, 4.6% for this year, 4.8% for 2019, 5.3% in 2020. Do you think that's the one they're worried about the most? And again, then, my question with relation to that, should we then be looking at how we treat that target band? It's no longer 3 to 6, but feels like it's a whole lot more, just 4.5.
Absolutely. It seems that the communication has increasingly emphasized the midpoint of the target range, although that has always been a key aspect of the Reserve Bank's approach. So the idea is by targeting that midpoint, when there are shocks to inflation, it doesn't take us out of that target range immediately. And there are so many risks to the inflation outlook that could materialize. It's a rand volatility. It's perhaps a tighter monetary policy in developed markets. It could be food prices.
It's Brexit, it's the trade wars, right?
So much uncertainty globally as well as in South Africa as well. And so in this environment, the Reserve Bank is taking this stance rather to keep interest rates on hold, rather than right now to risk lowering interest rates, and then in March we would have to increase again.
Similar thoughts?
Yeah, my biggest worry around that 4.5 is what he articulated, where he's got no control at all. The component of our inflation is administered prices, specifically the electricity, water, and others, who add enormous contribution to the inflation. Therefore, given the fact that both the consumer as well as business confidence is low, and the fact that we're proposing 15% compounded increases of electricity prices going forward, and the unknown around water. So I'm a bit concerned that, in as much as I don't like inflation, but I think in our situation whereby the levers rest outside the governor, they remain outside it, even though we engage with NERSA in terms of the electricity tariff. However, the municipalities don't give us much space to engage on the water and other rates that increase. So I'm a bit worried about that 4.5, that, is idealistic, given the fact that the South African regime as a whole refuses to take the pain of cutting down and freeing the markets, because, there's so much intervention and regulation by the state and other players at local level.
You agree with that, Maura?
Yes, so I think when Governor Lesteja Kganyago talks about the cost structure of the economy, it's quite possible that he's also referring to electricity and water tariffs. And given that Eskom is now applying for a 15% increase, which is 3 times the upper limit of the target range, or 3 times the midpoint of the target range, that is really concerning, and it explains why inflation is expected to be trending upwards.
And I mean, if you just take a look at the assumptions that they've released, of course, in conjunction with that interest rates decision, they expect 2019 inflation just on electricity prices to go up to 9.7%, which is almost double the 2018 figure, and that makes note of those administered prices. How much political influence, however, was involved in this decision today?
Zilch, nada. The political decision at the moment is a political decision that rests outside the Reserve Bank. What are those? Firstly, is that we have introduced minimum wage this month. And we know that we've got chronic unemployment. Therefore, the policy levers that I think we could be talking about as South Africans is labor market flexibility. We're talking about data costs, which remain very, very high in comparative terms. We're talking about oligopolies across many industries, from the food, from the drug, schooling supplies. So these are the core issues, and they rest outside the central bank. So it's where the Minister of Trade and Industry, the Minister of Economic Development, and the Minister of Finance to talk about the complete restructuring of the economy, free it, so that when you free it, I think the cost will come down. In that process, we can be able to create opportunities for the many South Africans, particularly the youth, that remain outside the labour market.
Key conversation then, or words from the governor there, was that structural problems are the ones that are facing South Africa's economy, which, as you said, doesn't necessarily lie with the South African Reserve Bank, and perhaps fiscal policy. And Tito Mboweni and his cabinet and his department need to be looking a lot more at that. Let's look at the quarterly pricing model, which is, of course, the model that the Reserve Bank itself put in place to say to themselves, this is kind of what we see possibly happening. It predicts one interest rate hike of 25 basis points between now and the end of 2021. It is a drastic drop from the 4 basis point hike a little earlier on, which brings me back to my first question. Should they then be just keeping things as is, considering that things are looking better in the long run? Maura?
I think they are taking into consideration that they have increased interest rates in November, and also that there is one interest rate hike of 25 basis points still on the cards. So they are incorporating that into their inflation outlook. Plus, things could change at any point in time. Oil prices could rise again. Food prices could rise. There are several risks to the inflation outlook. And until they have further subsided, it does not look like the South African Reserve Bank wants to take a more accommodative monetary policy stance.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Mondi?
Let me take you back to post-global economic and financial crisis, where Reserve Bank really opened up and loosened monetary policy. And on the other side, the South African government also went on a spending rampage.
Yeah.
So we had a loose monetary policy and we had a very loose fiscal policy, and we don't have much to say about it.
Yeah, one would say it did nothing for us.
Zilch. So, because in that environment, we have expected unemployment to have come down to about 18 or 15%, huge infrastructure everywhere, and we got zilch. So it seems to me that, in South Africa, that leadership that will take the pain really to cut the structural challenges is the one that can make monetary policy very effective.
Yeah.
At the moment, I think they try, they tweak, but really it's postponing pain, which this economy requires if it's going to create those jobs and create those opportunities that South Africans want to get in, but they can't get in because those of us who are in have shut the door for them.
We're quickly running out of time, but I want to ask you then, Lungile, if we should be worried then about the mandate changes and the mandate questions that came out in the second half, or that question session there. As you could tell, the mandate questions became a whole lot more, and that's because of the ANC's manifesto launch not so long ago. How much impact does that have now on future MPCs?
Well, in fact, let me tell us about the mandate. The mandate issue, I think South Africans should be very, very worried. They should be very, very worried because when you don't have any physical space, FISCAL, you look for other avenues of trying to stimulate demand.
Yes.
So therefore, knowing the record and the commission, the Zondo Commission sitting there of the ANC, it's very, very worrisome that if they don't have levers, they may look elsewhere to try and get in.
Yes.
That is why the Minister of Finance was talking about some wolves at the door. He's talking about that macroeconomic populism that we face from time to time. So I'll be worried, and I think until we close that, the politicians close that debate, many of us are going to be very concerned because really there's a track record of the ANC of really wasting public resources for private benefit.
Yeah. More sentiments the same?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about, very quickly, from both of you, for the remainder of this year, taking into consideration what the QPM says, hike, no hike throughout the year, and what does the interest rate level end at in November this year?
Potentially no hikes, so interest rates would stay where they are right now. That's good news for the consumer, especially given that inflation is also not going to spike as much as we anticipated.
Yeah.
We have an interest rate hike in the next. Interest rate cut in the next 10 months. I think there'll be no reason why, when the inflation going forward, the QPM is telling us it's coming down, and there's space for us to cut. I think let's cut. The Reserve Bank must do the right thing, cut. Otherwise, it exposes itself to political pressures about why are they keeping them low when we need.
We need to talk about this a lot more. You're going to come on and explain that a little bit. Hopefully we get a surprise. Look, it won't be a bad decision. I will not be unhappy with that. But folks, thank you so much for the time. Really, really appreciate it. Lumkile Mondi is a lecturer at the Wits School of Business and Economics, and more referred as an economist there at PwC. That ends our discussion, of course, on the Monetary Policy Committee, which has decided to keep interest rates unchanged with the repo rate at 6.75. Perhaps some good news for some. Whether it changes things for us, we'll certainly see. And of course, the questions around the mandate change and fiscal and monetary policy combining being answered a lot there by the Reserve Bank Governor. We'll continue to watch this space, but for now, that closes our discussion. Your news headlines coming up at the top of the hour.